it is not without risk because it is not federally legal yet to do most of your business in cash. You can't get loans in the same way, especially if you have a plant touching enterprise. You have to do handle all these different state regulations, which are constantly changing and are subject to like the whims of, political races and, potentially gerrymandering, all kinds of stuff that has nothing to do with Diddy. So, I think that's a tricky part, also not being a first mover in the way that somebody like Berner is.
All right, we have Zack O'Malley Greenburg back with us, who recently released hip hop's Wealthiest list for 2022. Your second year doing this independently, by the way. So shout outs to you on that. And it was great to see the results. We had some expectations, Jay-Z #1, but there's two people I really want to dive into with this conversation. Let me just run through the list first. So you have Jay-Z #1, $1.5 billion, Diddy 2, the newly minted billionaire, $1 billion. You have third, Ye at $500 million. Fourth, Berner, $410 million. And then we have Dr. Dre at $400 million. So let's start at the top. What was it like for you, not just releasing this independently, but being able to put it out? And as you were putting it together, what were some of the stuff that stuck out to you?
Yeah, first of all, this list is probably the thing that I put the most effort into every year. At the end of the day, you see these numbers, 1.5 billion, they get reported, and it was the same in my days at Forbes as doing it independently. People take the number and run with it, and I think a lot of times people just assume it's like somebody's pulling the number out of wherever. But I would say I put more time into those numbers than I have put into some cover stories, that are several pages long. So it's going through each of these, these superstars and figuring out, what's in their portfolio, what is each asset worth, calling people, who have knowledge, whether it's, within the camps of the stars themselves or industry experts that are covering, the booze business or the weed business, or something like that, finding ways of valuing these assets. And, and I think the new thing for me, aside from doing it independently, was I've been taking courses at Columbia Business School this year. I'm part of a fellowship where I sort of do first year at business school light and get to bounce around and learn some of these concepts that, maybe I didn't know before. I get to sharpen them. And it's given me some new tools for looking at things like Diddy's Ciroc partnership and, ways to value things that are a little bit weird and not sort of like a run of the mill asset. So, I think that the big takeaway, the big surprise, is probably Berner being on the list and being ahead of Dr. Dre. Like you said, I think Diddy being a billionaire finally, Diddy would say that's not news, he would say that he should be higher, I'm sure. But it's been really cool to take a look at it, independently and with some of these new tools in my toolkit to come up with I would say my most accurate list ever. Yeah.
That's good to hear. And I want to talk about Diddy first because I feel like that's the one. I'll be honest. The news there surprised me a bit, not because I didn't think that Diddy was a billionaire, but more so because of how his business is and how things are structured. And it made me wonder, okay, how much has changed? Because I knew that Ciroc was the main thing that he had. That was one of the largest drivers of his net worth. But you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that the sales had peaked around the mid 2010s and maybe there was a slight decline, but maybe you may have more intel on that. And I know that REVOLT, and I know with that business there and with Sean itself, I know he had sold it and bought it back. So I was a bit curious to see, or maybe hear, how much of his net worth changed as a result of something that had appreciated in value versus your calculations of how you'd be doing this now, as opposed to maybe how you had done it years back.
Yeah, I mean, so, I think my methodology changed slightly. The breakdown isn't that much different. Ciroc is still the main component. I would say it's you could say safely, it's the slight majority of his 1 billion net worth. And it's a weird arrangement because he does not hold an equity stake. However, the deal is structured to emulate an equity stake because it wouldn't have worked as an equity stake because Ciroc is owned by Diageo. It's this giant publicly traded company. They couldn't really be like, hey, here's a quarter of our company or something like that. There wasn't really a way to do that. So it was more creating a framework around the Ciroc brand to function like an equity stake. So if Diageo were ever to sell Ciroc, Diddy would get let's say the proceeds after you back out the amount of money that Ciroc has put into the partnership. So something like a third, it would be a lot, and there's no doubt that Ciroc, even if things have sort of flattened out a little bit, it's a multi-billion-dollar brand. I mean, if you look at something like Kettle One, brands like that have changed hands. These are billion-dollar brands, and Ciroc is, I think, number 2 behind Grey Goose. So it's up there. They're not going to sell it, but if they did, we're looking at a pretty big payday. So the question is, how do you value something that isn't going to get sold? And really, if you want to really nerd out about it from sort of MBA type perspective, thinking about valuing cash flows, that's one of the fundamentals of valuation in corporate finance and stuff like that. There are formulas, and without getting into like the sort of like more details of it, where you can sort of enter assumptions into the formula and you can get a number. And so what I did was I took the way I was doing it before, I ran the numbers that way, and then I kind of did some free cash flow analysis and kind of like average things out. And any way you slice it, the Ciroc partnership is worth a little more than half of his $1 billion valuation. The other things that I think perhaps I had been undercounted a little bit in the past or have appreciated a lot since then. Revolt is still hanging around there, and that's another thing where the valuation could depend. You value it as sort of a TV based entity, even though it's more digital? Do you value it as a news outlet? Do you value it as a tech startup? There are a bunch of different ways to look at it, but in any case, he is the majority owner there. Another thing that I think people sleep on is DeLeon tequila. That is really growing, and he owns half of that. Actually, it's a 50-50 joint venture with Diageo, and they're moving 100 and something thousand cases a year now. Actually, booze has done really well during the pandemic. You might imagine people, I don't know, I feel like we're back to some of our old ways of going out and doing things, but people are drinking at home during the pandemic. So Ciroc and DeLeon didn't get hurt in the way that let's say the live touring business did. So Diddy was pretty well insulated there. And then you go through and he's got like a pretty immense art collection. He's got some real estate that's appreciated pretty rapidly over the past few years. Some of which he owns outright. And you kind of add it all up, and he's comfortably a billionaire. And I mean, if you notice, like some folks, when they hit that status or when they make the list or something, will kind of like tweet about it. But I don't think I saw anything from Diddy because he's thought that he's a billionaire for years already, and maybe he was, but now I definitely think that he is, and I would expect to see other let's say mainstream business outlets follow suit and kind of acknowledging what's
I appreciate the
true.
breakdown there, and thinking about just the different categories there. If thinking about Ciroc itself, as you mentioned, maybe the sales flattened out a bit, but looking at Revolt specifically, and I know that business has gone through some evolutions as well over the past few years. Would it be safe to assume that the biggest valuation change here for Diddy's assets that maybe brought him to $1 billion is DeLeon and some of the artwork in terms of like what's appreciated? If we assume that whether it's Ciroc or Revolt have either flattened out a bit, like would those be the ones you say that have put him over $1 billion?
Yeah, he was pretty close before. Last time I did it for Forbes, I think was 3 years ago. I think he was at 740. Personally, without getting too deep into it, I would have put him a little higher. But you get your files edited, and that's part of the deal. And you got to create a consensus. And I think, and Forbes always says it would rather be conservative about valuations, that it would rather understate than overstate. Uh, but so that's part of it too. But yeah, I think there's definitely been an appreciation in the value of DeLeon, the real estate, the art. Certainly, there's a lot of startup stakes for Diddy. Like he's not doing it as let's say publicly as Nas or Jay-Z, but he definitely hops in as an angel in a lot of startups that have done well. So. But yeah, I think DeLeon is it doesn't get the glory of Ciroc, but it's a younger company. There's more room to grow, and not to be a shill, but it actually tastes really good. I've tasted other celebrity tequilas, and they're not good. But it is a tasty booze, if I may say so myself. And I think the way that he launched it was that he found this sort of, it was a like a boutique brand that had already won some awards, and then he kind of got in with Diageo, and they boosted it up to where it is now. So I really think that's probably like where you could see a lot more growth if he's going to start to try to challenge Jay-Z for that
Why do you
top
think
spot.
that DeLeon hasn't gotten that same amount of love that Ciroc has gotten, at least publicly?
I think a lot of attention was focused on, like Casamigos or some of the really big brands, and it hadn't quite gotten to that level with the same distribution and mind share. And frankly, I mean, I think Diddy had been devoting more energy to Ciroc, um, but you're starting to see it. It's a little bit less of an in your face kind of vibe with the brand. It's a little, it's like more of a sipping thing, less of the shots at the club kind of thing. Although I'm sure you could sip either or do shots of either at the club. But I think it's just they're it's just not around as much. I mean, I think the case volume on Ciroc is still like 10 times more than 10 times as high as DeLeon. So you're just not going to see it around as much, and
That
I
makes
think that's
sense.
why.
And the other thing too that you
Definitely.
mentioned is that DeLeon itself is actually a joint venture with Diageo, unlike the Ciroc partnership. So of course I know that the Ciroc partnership, now we're talking 15 plus years ago at this point when things kicked off, and different position, different leverage and relationship. So I'm curious, I wonder if the relationship is part of the reason why Diddy was able to have the type of ownership and partnership with DeLeon that he may not have, at least in writing, with Ciroc.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that was part of his motivation for how he structured DeLeon. He wanted to have that actual equity stake, like ironclad 50-50 joint venture type thing, rather than an agreement that mimics a joint venture. So, I think that the success of Ciroc definitely convinced Diageo, like, all right, this is, we can do this with another brand. He's the guy. And for my book, Three Kings, I talked to some folks over there, and they really. I think I talked to the CEO at the time, and they couldn't have been more effusive about him. And of course, like whatever, he's part of their team. Of course, they're gonna say good things about him. But they were saying just like the attention to detail. Like he would go to clubs and go to the bartender and be like, "Why is the Ciroc not on the top shelf?" And what are you going to do? You're going to be like, "Oh, sorry, Mr. Collins, you're going to leave it down here." And they would put it up on the top. I mean, it's that sort of like retail politics level of stuff. And I always say that Diddy, in a way, like you could argue who has had the most successful career, and who's the goat of on the business side, and I think a lot of people would say Jay-Z, and they would be wrong, but I think Diddy in a way has done more with less, because he hasn't been musically relevant in in a really long time in that way. And he still puts stuff out and whatever, but it's not like the anticipation that exists when Jay drops an album or even a verse on a DJ Khaled song or something. And I always like to say Diddy is kind of more like Richard Branson if he happened to just have had like a moment as like a big time rapper in the late '90s. And certainly as a producer, he's had a hand in a lot of things, and not to diminish that, but he acknowledged it himself. He says, "I don't write rhymes, I write checks," and I think that's a strong suit. And I think it's especially impressive to see that he's done it without being like a particularly talented
Yeah, I
lyricist.
think that his through line of being able to sell a lifestyle is what sets him apart in a lot of ways. He did it with his music. I think in a lot of ways, Bad Boys modeled after so much of what he learned at Uptown. And then you're able to transfer that lifestyle to, okay, this is the music that you listen to. Now, this is what you wear while listening to music. You wear Sean John. This is what you drink while you're listening to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to drink Ciroc. And this is the media that you're going to watch. And this is and now with the cannabis line that he just bought, this is what you're going to smoke while you're enjoying this lifestyle too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of those businesses have had varying success, and we can go into that. But I do think that the ones that have been the most successful, Ciroc, Sean John, and the music, there's that tight connection, and there's a key timing aspect that goes into all of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be his music, right? That is popular in order for the Ciroc formula to work. It's the Ciroc Boys, it's DJ Khaled, and the Summer Watermelon, or whatever it is. I think his ability to make those partnerships, to find other people, who are kind of doing now what he was doing then musically, are I think that's part of the formula, and that's why it works so well. And it's funny, like uh, DJ Khaled, something like Wild Thoughts was doing exactly what Diddy was doing a couple decades ago, right? He was taking a song from a couple decades ago, 1 or 2 decades ago, and putting, some new voices, modern voices on it. And it was a song that was great before, and now it's got, like more, kind of a current vibe to it, and it goes up the charts. So, I think Diddy is just very savvy with that kind of stuff, even
Yeah,
if
that's
it's
a
not
good
his own
point.
stuff.
Let's talk about Sean John for a bit, because I'm curious how that factored into your methodology with everything. Because as many people know, he had started the brand over 20 years ago. And now, well, in 2016, he sold the brand. Then the brand was up in auction, and then he bought it for, the public number I saw was $7.6 million. So now he has that back as an asset. How did that piece of it factor in for you, and just the journey overall of Sean John?
Yeah, and not much now. I think what factored in more was sort of like his cash pile. Like he sold it for, I think, like whatever it was 5 years ago, something like that. I think did he get like 30 million or 40 million, something like that, that he then put into other things. And obviously without him, it doesn't do well, and so it went bankrupt. And I think it's really smart for him to buy it back. Who knows what he might end up doing with it, but I think there's just like a tremendous market for sort of like '90s nostalgia right now. And I think a Sean John or even a Rockaware, if they could have, I don't know, that's a little more complicated, but I think that it fits. And if he's at the helm and is part of the lifestyle, you would never count him out. So, but yeah, as far as what it's worth right now, it's not. It's sort of more of a rounding error in the overall number. But just it'd be interesting to see what it
And
does
when you
with it.
made your list around the same time, I believe that same week, there were two other announcements that came up. One was the cannabis company that he bought for, I believe it was $185 million. And the other one, I don't know if this one was 100% confirmed, but did you see that thing floating around about him making an investment in Twitter along with Elon Musk's bid?
Yeah, no, that was all after the numbers got finalized. So, those weren't really factored into it. But I mean, yeah, it all makes sense. It's all part of the lifestyle thing. It's all part of the sort of the Diddy empire, the Diddy MO. And, he's, look, I mean, on the cannabis side, right? Like, he's Puff Daddy. It's like, what are you puffing? It makes sense. It's like part of the brand. And if he could do the same thing with cannabis he did with vodka, which is to say, like, I mean, I don't know. I think when he started Ciroc, vodka was not, it was not really seen as a stylish thing. It was more of like you do a shot to get drunk. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's because I was in college when that happened, and that's what that was sort of the vibe around vodka. But he made it like the champagne of vodkas. He associated his lifestyle with it, and similarly, I think with weed, it's like, we're in this very nascent part of the cannabis economy, becoming legal, and sort of how do you start to differentiate brands, and when you have legalization, you can have, like the champagne of weed, right? You can start to differentiate, like what type of buzz you're going to get because it's regulated, and you can actually say like this is a thing that has this much THC and it's going to give you this kind of high versus like this is just going to knock you on your ass. Uh, I think that I think it's a great place for him to get into, but at the same time, it's like it is a really hard place to do business still, and it is not without risk. It, because it is not federally legal yet, you have to do most of your business in cash. You can't get loans in the same way, especially if you have a plant touching enterprise. You have to handle all these different state regulations, which are constantly changing and are subject to like the whims of political races and potentially gerrymandering and all kinds of stuff that has nothing to do with Diddy. So I think that's a tricky part, and also not being a first mover in the way that somebody like Berner is. But at the same time, it's like he fills a different niche in the market potentially than Berner does, and it'll
Yeah,
be
no,
interesting to see what he does
that'll be
with it.
fascinating to watch. I think the last piece that we can close out with Diddy, just talking a little bit about Revolt, and I think it's one of these companies that I've thought a lot about, where I feel like the overall narrative is that great vision for what this is and why it exists. I think the timing for so much of it was a bit tough, and I'll break that down in two ways. First, I think that if I just think back to like the heyday of MTV, I feel like Diddy was one of the biggest people like making that network what it was. I remember when he was out there wearing the vote or die shirts, or he was trying to pump different artists up. He, from a hip hop artist perspective, knew how to leverage that platform so well. So the thought of being like, okay, well, I'm doing all this for them, why don't I go start my own? Yeah, that makes perfect sense the way that it did. I think the things that were a little bit tough, and maybe why that's not a larger contributor to that overall net worth, thinking about great concept, and the vision, of course, makes sense, seeing how influential Diddy was with MTV, and whether it's the vote or die shirts that he would wear or some of the other programming, he leveraged it so well as a hip hop artist. So if you have that impact, why wouldn't you want to go start your own company and go do the same, right? I think some of the timing just became a little tough in that he started the cable network in 2013. People are already starting to cut the cord at that point. And then I know the company's transitioned much more into digital media, but even that, given that so much of it is social media based, relying on other platforms and their algorithms, I think we saw so many of those companies in that same time frame, even the ones that were perceived as being successful, whether it's your BuzzFeeds or your Huffington Post or your Complex, like all of those valuations came back down to earth. And you look at a company like Revolt, which I think was largely playing the same game, although I think they still make tons of great content and there are tons of great, brilliant people working there. I think that just digital media itself and where things transformed was a bit tough. Like, let's say that Diddy had started Revolt, let's say 2007, as opposed to 2013, I think we'd be having a very different conversation.
Or 1997. I mean, yeah, I think it could be a whole different conversation, and yeah, that's one of the smaller pieces of the empire. And I think like he would make a certain argument about it, and valuing it more like on the lines of being a tech company, but it's hard to escape the fact that it still is like I would say, yeah, like primarily a media outlet at this point, and whether it's via cable or the internet or whatever, it's like these are not like these are kind of tricky places to be. But it does make sense. There is a demand for that kind of stuff, and it's a crowded marketplace. But he does have something different to offer, and I think that there's a reason why it's still around, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes, how it proceeds as we enter like the next phase of this sort of media shakeup
Yeah,
in an
yeah,
uncertain
definitely.
economy.
And I think the other thing too that I should have mentioned earlier is that given that this is a black-owned media company, I know he's been vocal, and Byron Allen and others have been vocal about advertisers not contributing the same level of money into black-owned media companies that they would to, let's say, some of Revolt's competitors in the space that maybe started and run by white founders, white executives, but they're commanding more money from that perspective. So I think that's another tough thing there. But overall, like we said, this is a small piece of the overall pie. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see, especially the
Yeah.
newer businesses, how many of them can continue that Ciroc magic, the bad boy flavor, and see where that lifestyle keeps going. Yeah. All right.
For
Well,
sure,
now
for
let's
sure.
talk about the other big one on the list, Berner. And based on the response that I saw from people sharing the list, people talking about it, this is the one that surprised a lot of people. But I know it didn't surprise you because you've been following this for a while. You've been talking to Berner, getting a better understanding for his business. So it'd be great to hear the breakdown because I think a lot of people out there may know Berner now more so for this product than they may actually his music or anything else that he's done in hip hop up to now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think Berner is one of the most fascinating names on the list, definitely the most surprising. But, I've been following his work for a while, and, he is a master marketer. And his whole journey about how he turned Cookies Cannabis into this, it is a $1 billion company. And it's just a little tricky to value, but it is a $1 billion company. And the way he did it, it's I would say it's a case study, but it's actually pretty hard to emulate. It is a sort of like a singular way of doing things. So for the people who don't know the background, Berner was born in California in San Francisco, grew up there, moved to Arizona as a teenager, and would bring back good weed from California whenever he would make trips back to his old stomping grounds, and that's how he kind of like got his start. He moved back to San Francisco during the early weed legalization gold rush, worked at a dispensary, and kind of popularized this Girl Scout cookies strain of weed. And so his thing would at the dispensary, he would they used to sell things. It was just sort of like an index card with the name of the strain. It was like very clinical. But he would sort of like do these doodles and cookies and these like bright colors and stuff. And it started to get some attention. He became Wiz Khalifa's weed man when he was in San Francisco, and on one occasion brought this like fully budded 6 foot tall weed plant onto the stage at a Wiz Khalifa show, and I think was sort of like instrumental in Wiz Khalifa creating Khalifa Kush and all this stuff. And so Berner ultimately parlayed this sort of underground, um, you know, weed connoisseur image that he had as a both on the legal and illegal markets, into this brand. Cookies started opening stores, created a clothing line that kind of goes along with it, and but the thing that he did with the way he set up his company is it's pretty unusual and very hard to value. But it I think is quite brilliant. He started striking these partnerships with dispensaries, and essentially it was a licensing deal where he would get a cut of profits off of the top. But or sorry, not just profits. He would get a cut of revenue, and then the other part of the deal was that he could also buy out any of these partners at market rate at a time future, in the future to be determined. And like some of these numbers are out there, but I think the system wide sales are close to $500 million now. Um, and so he doesn't actually, he gets a cut of that, but at any time he could decide to he could raise money, roll all these partnerships up into one giant weed company that's, um, making that kind of revenue. Uh, and suddenly, all you need to do is you put a multiple on that, and that would tell you what the company would be worth if he rolled it all up and bought everybody out. And I talked to a Wall Street analyst about this who covered the space, and they said, yeah, you would put like a 5x multiple on this. So that would mean it's like about a $2 billion company. Then you have to factor in the cost of buying out all those partnerships, which, long story short, would probably be about $500 million. Because it is a very illiquid business, or sorry, rather, I mean, it is a very tricky business. In fact, you have to be very liquid of doing everything in cash. It's kind of complicated, but people I talked to, bankers and stuff, said, yeah, you would apply a private company discount due to the uncertainty of the market, things like that, that it's operating in. You would knock 20-30% off of that. And so that it brings it down to around $1 billion, and then Berner still owns about a third of it. And so that's, there's the bulk of his fortune right there. So his stake is probably worth around $300 million at this point, I figure. And I think that's pretty conservative. Then you add in some other things invested in the clothing line, which he owns, a huge part of still, some homes, cash, stuff like that. And you get to that $410 million number.
Yeah, I've been seeing people wearing the cookies hoodies walking around San Francisco, walking around other places. So, but definitely seeing the apparel thing push. And I feel like he has one of those brands where I'll probably see even more of that stuff. I think it was a couple of weeks ago I was driving by and I saw the store on Haight in Haight Ashbury neighborhood here in San Francisco. So yeah, no, definitely making moves.
Yeah.
A few things there that stuck out. So he, of course, has his own standalone stores. As you mentioned, there's 55 of them across the country right now. And he also was selling them to other dispensaries. And I'm sure if and when weed does become legalized across the country, that will then just make things even easier from a distribution perspective from other places that he may be able to sell than he otherwise. So in some ways, the investment isn't just based on what's currently there, or there's also a speculative nature on as this underlying product becomes more and more legal, there will be more opportunity to further sell this and further have its reach to different places.
Absolutely. And the clothing line also builds the value of the cannabis brand. And, if and when it is federally legalized, you got to think, I mean, this is one of the top brands in the business. And in fact, there aren't really brands in this way in the cannabis space. There's strains. There's like, people have like, it's almost saying like in beer, like, yeah, people like IPAs or people like Pilsners or whatever, but there isn't really like a Budweiser yet or a Dogfish Head, or something like that. And, there isn't, to go back to Diddy, there's not like really a champagne of weed. So, I think that Berner has built up all this credibility in the space, and if and when it goes legal, it's like to be one of the top weed brands in this space that is going to, potentially rival, or at least kind of start to eat into alcohol business. I mean, 2 billion is not a large number for a company. There's just like a lot of potential for it to get a lot bigger. And, we can get into there's definitely a lot of arguments, pro and cons, the benefits of THC and cannabis in general. And, we could be here all day on that. But just from a business perspective, it seems like we're headed toward legalization. Berner actually thinks that that Republicans are more likely to make federal legalization happen, he said, because they're all about their paper. So I don't know who I'm not saying who he's voting for or anything. I don't know, but it was interesting perspective, and I think that he's really got a kind of a keen awareness of
One of
where
the
he
other
was
things that
heading.
sticks out to me about him is that he's someone who is much more known, at least on a general awareness perspective, for the business that he's built as opposed to the music. I feel like his music was a bit more of a regional thing, and he puts out a ton of music, but it never hit the same levels as some of the other artists who are having 9-figure net worths as well. And I feel like there's often this thought, and which I do believe generally is true, that the artists who tend to be the most successful with product sales and investing and some of the more lucrative business opportunities that artists have done, they're more likely to be the household names who have been releasing music and touring for decades. And a lot of times it's because they're releasing products that are lending their name. So they're leveraging their influence to now sell things that they just have a larger stake in and can be bought time and time again. He's a little different though,
Mm-hmm.
because he doesn't necessarily have that. And I'm curious what you think about that piece of it, because I think so many of the hip hop cash lists over the years do have at least somewhat of a correlation as to who are the more well-known artists or who are the more popular artists at the time, and not necessarily who is building the strongest business, that is being worth the most. And that is not correlated with how much mainstream popularity that artist may have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the funny thing is when you look at it, he is the most prolific artist on the list, but he is like has the least name recognition as well, right? I mean, Jay-Z, Diddy, Kanye, Dr. Dre are none of them are putting out music at the pace with which Berner is putting out music, but everybody knows who they are, and not everybody knows Berner. Um, I think it's so like you could almost argue like, well, are you really going to put him on the on the list with these guys who have that much more name recognition? But you could also argue, should we really be treating Diddy as a rapper any more than we should be treating Richard Branson as a rapper? I know Richard Branson didn't actually rap ever, but effectively, Diddy is just focused on business at this point, and he puts out songs here and there. Music is ancillary. Berner also uses the music to boost the weed business, but he's in the studio like all the time, more than any of these guys. So yeah, it's just kind
Yeah.
of a
I
funny
think another
dichotomy.
person that is somewhat on a similar type of thought process, or not thought process, but have maybe thought of a similar way, someone like Chamillionaire, who had one really large hit,
Mm-hmm.
but wasn't necessarily known for having classic after classic after classic album or touring the world in the same large ways as some of the other big names we did. But his investing journey is something that has been pretty well documented. And I think as a result, he's definitely further than a lot of the other artists that came up around the same time as him that may have had even more commercial success. So I feel like even though there is a lot of a correlation between who are the most well-known artists and who are the wealthiest artists, he is someone else who is a bit similar in that Berner way of, hey, yeah, there may have been a smaller overall impact from the music itself, but was able to wisely use that and then now
Mm-hmm.
leverage that into something where, the artist is making more money from the business moves and more known for that now.
Absolutely. I mean, great example with Chamillionaire and the work that he's been doing in the startup world. So it's at the same time, it's like if he hadn't had that one big hit, would he have been able to get into the Silicon Valley kind of sphere in the same way? I don't know, but I think all it takes is one hit to be in the mix, and certainly like Berner never had that one hit, right? He just had a lot of really solid albums and stuff, but he was doing it in San Francisco, and I think in that way that you see somebody like Draymond Green getting really involved in the startup world. Would he have been that guy if he were in like Cleveland or something? I don't think so. But if you're in the mix in the Bay Area, you're just going to have access to a lot more opportunities. In the startup world, and I think startup world, cannabis world, it's like kind of the epicenter there. So in a funny way that the two have a lot of commonalities. I think
Right.
Berner and Millionaire.
Yeah. This is good. I'm excited to see what next year's list looks like as well. And I know you may not be able to share publicly, but in order to get the five, you probably evaluated a few others. Are there any names creeping up or rising up that you think may make a 2023 appearance?
Yeah, I think Drake is creeping up, big new deal. He doesn't have quite the same level of sort of like outside assets. Like he doesn't have like a Ciroc or a cookies or what have you. And I think he does have this whiskey Virginia Black, but it doesn't it like never like it's still around, but it never really took off. And it only tastes okay. It's okay, but um, I don't think taste ultimately matters a lot of times with this stuff. But I'm kind of surprised that he wasn't able to like boost it a little bit more. But maybe it's that I don't know. When I think Drake, I don't really think whiskey. Maybe that's just part of it. I mean, I could see him more champagne, maybe champagne coffee, but
Yeah, I'm
um,
interested to see for him
yeah,
how
I don't know.
this new deal he has and the music that he makes as a result ends up factoring in. Because, of course, we know that music itself may not be the largest revenue stream for a lot of these artists, but Drake has this huge deal with Universal and Republic now, and he's releasing music more frequently than ever. And we can assume that it's likely because he's getting better upside and margins for the music he's releasing. So if he keeps up at
Yeah,
this like 2, 3 albums a
yeah,
year clip, I mean, the numbers are going to speak for itself. Last year, he streamed more than all pre
yeah,
1980 artists. Like, it's going to catch up.
yeah, yeah. I think the other thing with net worth list as opposed to earnings is that it's just harder to get on these lists if you are a big cash earner. Like if you were earning a lot on an annual basis, you know, things get factored into that, like taxes and cost of living and all that. And so, you're getting these huge outlays, but it's not in the same way that where it's like going into this growing asset that can be valued independently, and in a way that's kind of like a quirk of the system because I'm valuing Berner's steak and cookies, um, you know, like as a it's not taxed, right? Like if he were to sell it and he were to get $300 million, whatever, a third, half of that would be gone to the government, but that's not baked into the formula until he sells it. So it's just and this is how Bloomberg and Forbes do it. It's like it kind of is what it is. But it means that if you were holding assets, the taxes aren't taken out. Whereas if you're a cash earner, that gets deducted before it gets added to your cash pile. So it just means Drake is more likely to be at the top of let's say top earning artist lists, and it's a little harder for him to get to the top of the net
That's a good
worth list.
distinction. No, we'll definitely keep that in mind for next year. Do you think you'll do another top earners of the
Yeah,
year list as well?
I don't know. Maybe we'll see how it goes. It's certainly being a new dad, and doing this full time program. This fellowship at Columbia that I mentioned. It takes a lot out, a lot of time, and I don't want to put out a list unless I have the time to really dig in and get the numbers right. So, but yeah, you never know. I got this one out, so it could be more
Yeah,
to come.
no.
Yeah.
And I think on that note, just talking about dad life in general, let's close things out there. So by the time this comes out,
Yeah.
your daughter will be 6 months old, and we can both share one funny thing that our kids did this past couple of weeks. So I'll let you start.
Oh man. Well, I think the thing that's really the most exciting is that she's laughing now, and the thing that she mainly thinks is funny is when I'm laughing. So like we'll get into this thing where I just start random, like I will make myself start laughing, and then she'll go and I'll go and we just it's very dorky dad life, but that is like one of my favorite things to do is have like sort of a laugh off with Riley. So yeah, I don't know, man. I pick her up from daycare every day, and and she just gives me this like huge smile. And I know that she's still really young, but I can tell that she's specifically recognizing me, and that we have this bond already, that there's like a specific connection. I just had no idea that babies could sort of like differentiate people and start to have unique relationships in that way. And man, it's like the best part of my day every day. So,
That's
yeah,
awesome. That's
yeah. How
awesome.
about you?
Yeah, I feel like there's something about that. Like for
Yeah.
the first couple months, I remember I would like ask my wife, I'd be like, you think she recognizes us? Like, do you think she like understands like who we are? And I think over time it was like, yeah, no, we can get that in. Even things like now, the mirror is something that she is obsessed with. And I'm sure you probably feel the same with Riley too. But yeah, the mirror, she just like at first it was kind of looking at the mirror where there's like, okay, what is this screen? Who is that person that I'm seeing? But I think now it's like
Mm,
looking at us through the mirror and like seeing that it's us. And maybe she's starting to be like, oh, well, if I see them through this, like she probably still isn't at the point where it's like, oh, I can see that's looking at me, but she'll look at that other person staring at her in the mirror and start smiling and stuff too. So I'm like, oh, that's cute. So yeah, man.
yeah.
Wild. Time's flying by. She'll be 5 months by
Yeah.
the time this comes
Oh,
out.
it's
But
the
yeah,
best. Yeah.
wild, man.
Yeah. 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 We do a lot of like,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
who is
Yep.
that?
Little peekaboo
Yeah.
style games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the mirror. Yeah.
Oh man.
Exactly. Exactly. So, well, we'll have to have our kids together sometime soon. I guess, but of course, babies not so interactive with each other
Yeah.
yet,
No, we'll get
but
there.
we'll
We'll
get we'll
make
get
that
there. We'll
happen.
get
That'll
there.
be fun. That'll be fun. But Zach, no, this is great, man.
Yeah.
Good work as always. It was great to see the list. And again, the fact that I think you got just as much coverage
Thank
and
you.
buzz and recognition for this, doing it independently is a great sign, not just for you, but I think in general for people that are always questioning, okay, what's the power of what I do elsewhere versus individually. So great job on that. And we'll definitely keep tabs on this coming years, but great work, man, as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Same to you.